The restaurant was quiet, except for the soft clinking of glasses and the gentle hum of polite conversation. It was one of those places where everything looked perfect: polished floors, crystal chandeliers, and the kind of tables that seemed to have been set by invisible hands. People here were wealthy, used to fine food and expensive wine. They laughed softly, spoke softly, and moved with a calm that only money could buy. Yet among all this elegance, one person moved almost unnoticed: a young waitress, quietly making her way between the tables. She had been working here for a few months, but she had been a waitress for years. She knew the rhythm of the restaurant, when to approach, when to step back, and when to smile just enough. Her uniform was plain, almost invisible compared to the glittering outfits of the guests. Her shoes made soft sounds on the polished floor as she carried plates and poured wine, always careful not to spill. No one really saw her, but she saw everything. She noticed the small details: the way a man's cufflinks shone in the light, the way a woman's laughter faded when she checked her phone, and the tiny flicker of a nervous glance when a couple argued softly at the corner table. In the corner of the room stood a grand piano. It was polished, black, and perfect, like something out of a dream, but it sat empty, untouched, as if it were waiting for someone who could bring it to life. Most of the guests didn't even glance at it. To them, it was just another decoration, part of the luxurious setting. But to the young waitress, it was something entirely different. She paused for a moment as she passed by, her hand brushing against the edge of the piano. For a second, she let herself remember. She remembered a time when music had been everything to her. When she was a little younger, before life became a struggle, she had dreamed of playing in big halls, of sitting at pianos and making people stop just to listen. But dreams like that had a way of slipping away when bills had to be paid, when work had to come first, and when life demanded practicality. She had put her music away, tucked it in a corner of her heart, and learned to move quietly through the world. Tonight, she wore her usual uniform, simple black pants and a white shirt. Her hair was tied back, and she moved with careful precision, a smile ready for anyone who needed it. She poured water into glasses, topped off wine, cleared empty plates. She was good at her job, almost too good. Some of the guests noticed it, but most were too wrapped up in their own world to pay attention. She had become invisible in the very place that valued appearance above all else. A soft laugh from the main table caught her attention. A group of wealthy people had gathered for a private event, and they were celebrating something: a birthday, maybe, or a business deal. She couldn't tell, and she didn't need to. Her job wasn't to know their lives. It was to serve them, and to do so without being seen. But as she carried a tray of desserts past the piano, her eyes caught the polished black surface again. She felt a strange pull in her chest. The piano seemed to whisper to her. It didn't make a sound, but somehow, in the quiet of the restaurant, it spoke. It reminded her of afternoons spent with her own piano back home, when the sun would pour through the window, and her fingers would fly across the keys as if they had a life of their own. She remembered the feeling of getting lost in music, of forgetting the world, of being completely and utterly alive. A small table in the far corner had gone quiet. A little boy sat there with his mother, and he looked bored. He had been tapping his fingers on the table, glancing around, clearly too young to care about wine or conversation. The waitress paused, noticing how restless he was. She smiled to herself, remembering how music had always worked like magic on children. It could calm them, delight them, and even make them forget themselves for a few precious moments. As she moved closer to the kitchen to fetch another tray, she overheard a waiter whisper to someone else. "The pianist isn't here yet," he said. "I don't know what they're going to do." Her heart skipped a beat. She had almost forgotten the piano wasn't just decoration. Someone was supposed to play it tonight, and that person hadn't shown up. The thought sent a small jolt of fear and excitement through her. She shook her head slightly and continued her work. Of course, she told herself, she couldn't do anything. She was just a waitress. This wasn't her stage, and these weren't her people. But as she carried the tray of desserts back into the dining room, her eyes kept finding the piano. It seemed larger than before, more important. She imagined the sound it could make, imagined the notes floating across the room, imagined people pausing just to listen. A tiny spark of longing ignited in her chest. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversation. The clinking of glasses, the soft steps of the servers. But the waitress felt a change, subtle and almost invisible. She could feel it in the air, in the way the room seemed to hold its breath. Something was about to happen. She didn't know what it was, but she knew it had something to do with that piano. Sitting silently in the corner, she moved to the side, pretending to adjust a chair and watch the room. People laughed, they talked, they gestured, but none of them noticed her pause. She could have stayed invisible forever, and no one would have cared. But there was something in her that refused to stay invisible. The piano called to her, a gentle but insistent reminder of who she had been and who she could still be. Her hands itched with the memory of playing. She had learned long ago that music was more than just notes on a page. It was a way to speak without words, to show emotions that couldn't be named, to connect with people without even looking at them. She had played for herself, for her family, and for small gatherings, but she had never played in a place like this, surrounded by people who expected elegance but had no idea what real passion sounded like. She shook her head again and returned to her work, carrying a tray of sparkling desserts to a table. A guest smiled at her, complimented her on her service, and she nodded politely. But her eyes kept drifting toward the piano. Every time she passed it, she felt a stronger pull. It was as if the piano knew she was there, as if it had been waiting for her all along. The night moved slowly. Courses were served, conversations flowed, and the wealthy guests continued their private celebration, unaware of the quiet storm brewing in the corner. The waitress moved from table to table, careful not to show any sign of distraction. But inside, she was thinking about what could happen if she were brave enough. If she dared to follow that pull, she remembered the first time she had touched a piano. The way her fingers had felt awkward but determined. She remembered the first time she had played a song that made her father smile. The first time she had played a piece so perfectly that she had surprised even herself. That feeling, the one where time disappeared and only the music remained, was back now, stronger than ever. The restaurant was her world tonight, and she was supposed to serve quietly. But the piano had reminded her of another world, one she had almost forgotten. She didn't know if she could step into it again, didn't know if anyone would even notice if she did. All she knew was that the music inside her was waiting, just as patiently as the piano waited in the corner. For the first time in months, maybe years, she allowed herself a small smile. Something was about to change tonight, though she didn't yet know what. The piano wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a promise, a reminder, and a challenge. And she was beginning to feel that maybe, just maybe, she could rise to it. The night continued, but everything felt different now. The chandeliers seemed brighter, the conversations sharper, and the soft music in the background a little louder, or maybe it was just her imagination. She kept moving, kept serving, but her thoughts kept returning to the piano. She passed by it one last time before the main course arrived. Her hand brushed lightly against its smooth black surface. A shiver ran down her spine. She knew the piano wasn't asking for permission, it was demanding courage. And deep down she felt ready, even if she couldn't yet admit it out loud. Tonight would not be ordinary. She didn't know how, she didn't know why, but she could feel it in the air. Something was about to happen that would change everything, and she would be at the center of it, whether she was ready or not. And as she returned to the kitchen to fetch the next tray, her mind whispered one simple truth. Sometimes, the most important moments in life arrive when no one is looking, and sometimes the smallest person in the room has the power to leave everyone else speechless. The waitress moved through the restaurant, carrying trays and refilling glasses, but her mind was elsewhere. The piano in the corner had awakened something she had buried a long time ago, a memory of who she really was before life demanded that she hide her dreams. She walked carefully, pretending to focus on her work. But every few steps her eyes drifted to the grand black instrument. She remembered the small apartment, where she had grown up, where an old upright piano stood in the corner, worn but full of life. Her parents hadn't been rich, Every penny mattered, and luxuries were rare. Yet somehow that piano had been a treasure. It had been the first place she felt free, the first place she discovered a world bigger than the one around her. Hours had passed as she practiced, lost in the music, her fingers dancing across the keys while the world outside her window faded into silence. Life had changed gradually. Bills needed to be paid. Jobs had to be found. Music became something she loved but could not pursue. She took jobs at cafes, restaurants, and catering events. She learned to smile politely, move quickly, and stay invisible. She became skilled at blending in, at being part of the background, so no one would notice her dreams or her longing. The piano she had loved so much was left behind, gathering dust, as if it had given up on her too. And yet, here she was again, standing in a room filled with wealth and luxury, and the music inside her stirred. It was strange to think that she had spent years hiding her talent, and now it seemed to demand attention. She shook her head slightly and focused on the table in front of her, where a couple of guests were debating which dessert to choose. She served them quietly, but inside her thoughts kept returning to the piano. It wasn't just the music she remembered. It was the feeling, the way she had felt when she played something perfectly. The thrill of hitting the right note, the joy of losing herself completely. Music had always been more than entertainment. It was a way to speak without words, to tell stories that couldn't be told any other way. And she realized that she had missed it more than she had admitted to herself. A few minutes passed, and the kitchen grew busy with the usual clatter of pots and pans. Other waiters moved with practiced efficiency, but she stayed near the edge of the dining room, trying to stay in the moment without drawing attention. Her thoughts wandered again, this time to the people who had been part of her past life, the music teachers. The small recitals she had played in, and the few times she had performed for strangers who had actually listened. Those moments had been rare, but they had been magical. She had felt alive in a way she rarely felt now. Her eyes drifted to a small boy sitting with his parents at a corner table. He was fidgeting, glancing around, clearly bored. Something about his impatience tugged at her. She remembered being a child herself, restless and full of energy, always searching for beauty and excitement in the world. Music had been her refuge, her escape. She could almost see the same spark in the boy that she had once had. A smile tugged at her lips, small but real, as she wondered what it would feel like to bring that spark back to life tonight. Meanwhile, the wealthy guests continued their quiet celebration, speaking softly about business, vacations, and parties. They were surrounded by elegance, yet they seemed disconnected from each other. Conversations overlapped, polite laughter echoed, but there was a strange emptiness beneath it all. She noticed the subtle expressions, the fleeting glances, the slight tension in their voices. It reminded her that money did not always bring happiness or connection. True emotion came from somewhere else, and music had the power to reveal it. She returned to the kitchen to pick up another tray, and as she did, she overheard a conversation between two staff members. "The pianist isn't here yet," one whispered. "I don't know what they'll do. The guests will start noticing soon." Her heart skipped a beat. For a moment, she allowed herself a thought she had not dared before. Maybe she could play. She shook her head quickly. No, that was impossible. She was just a waitress. She didn't belong in a room like this as a performer. She had no right. And yet, the thought lingered like a stubborn melody she couldn't ignore. As she served a table near the piano, she glanced at it again. Its black surface gleamed under the chandelier lights. She imagined the sound of the keys, the resonance filling the room, the music weaving through the conversations and touching everyone in some unseen way. The more she imagined it, the more her longing grew. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was a need she couldn't explain. Her mind drifted to her family, to the sacrifices they had made, and to the moments when she had felt trapped by responsibility. She had learned to put herself last, to hide her talents, and to survive. But tonight, the piano seemed to ask for more than survival. It seemed to ask for courage. And for the first time in years, she considered the possibility that she might be able to answer. She moved carefully between tables, serving food and pouring wine, but she was no longer completely present in the restaurant. Her attention was split between her duties and the piano, and she realized that each passing minute made the idea harder to ignore. She had spent so long hiding, so long blending in, that the thought of stepping forward felt dangerous. But it also felt inevitable. The boy in the corner table caught her eye again. He was now staring at the piano, curious and expectant. She could see the small hope in his expression, a spark that reminded her of herself. Suddenly she felt a strange connection to him, as if the music she could create might reach him, even in this crowded, formal room. A small smile spread across her face. Maybe, just maybe, she could do this, not for the guests, but for that boy and for the little girl she had once been. She returned to the edge of the room, pretending to adjust a chair, and her fingers brushed lightly against the edge of the piano. It was smooth and cold under her touch, but it felt alive somehow. She closed her eyes for a moment and imagined playing. The notes flowed in her mind effortlessly, each one carrying emotion, each one telling a story. She could almost hear the gasps, the silence, the awe. And for a brief moment she allowed herself to imagine the impossible, that she might be the one to fill this room with music tonight. The restaurant hummed with activity. But in her mind, the world had narrowed down to a single point, the piano and her own courage. She thought about all the times she had played in secret, all the moments she had wished someone would listen. No one here had any idea what she could do, and that made her both nervous and excited. She had no safety net, no rehearsal, no announcement. But she had her talent, and she had her heart. Her thoughts were interrupted when a waiter whispered again, this time louder, "We need someone to play. The guests are starting to notice. What do we do?" Something inside her stirred. She realized that the moment she had been imagining might be closer than she thought. The idea of stepping forward terrified her, but it also thrilled her. She could feel the music waiting, calling, demanding to be heard. She was no longer just a waitress in the background. She was someone who could change the atmosphere of the entire room with her gift. For a few seconds, she stood frozen, weighing fear against longing. She thought about all the sacrifices she had made, all the years she had spent hiding, and all the moments when she had doubted herself. And then she thought about the piano, the boy, the feeling of music running through her veins, and she realized that this was the moment she had been waiting for. No one had to know who she was. No one had to approve. All that mattered was the music, the connection, and the courage to take a step forward. Her heart raced and her fingers itched. She knew that once she moved, there would be no turning back. But for the first time in a long time, that didn't matter. The night continued around her, elegant and polished, but something inside her had shifted. The piano waited silently, and she felt its quiet encouragement. She had spent so long living in the shadows, and now the shadows seemed ready to lift. If only she dared to take a single step. As she placed a tray down on a table and nodded politely to a guest, she realized something important. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. Courage was moving forward despite it. And maybe tonight, that courage would not only change her life, but also touch the lives of everyone in the room in ways she could not yet imagine. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and began to move toward the piano. The world seemed to narrow again, everything else fading into the background. The only thing that mattered was the black instrument waiting for her, the music inside her, and the decision she had been avoiding for years. And in that quiet, tense moment, she realized that tonight she might finally stop hiding. Tonight she might finally play. The restaurant seemed unchanged at first. The chandeliers glimmered, the glasses clinked softly, and the guests continued their conversations without noticing anything unusual. But for the young waitress, everything had shifted. She stood a few steps from the grand piano, her hands trembling slightly, her heart beating fast. Each breath felt heavier, charged with anticipation and fear. For a moment she froze. The idea of sitting at the piano, of performing in front of strangers, was almost paralyzing. She reminded herself she was just a waitress. She had no right to take the stage. No one had asked her to play, and yet the piano seemed to call to her louder than ever. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside her. The polished black surface of the piano reflected the warm lights above. As if it were silently waiting for her courage, she took another step forward. Her shoes made soft, hesitant sounds on the polished floor. Every eye in the restaurant was somewhere else, focused on conversation, laughter, or the glow of the chandeliers. She realized that no one was paying attention to her. And in that quiet moment, she felt a flicker of possibility. If she could just place her fingers on the keys, the music might take over. A waiter passed by, carrying a tray of drinks. He glanced at her and frowned slightly. "Are you going to?" he asked quietly. She shook her head slightly, giving a small smile. "I think I can," she whispered to herself, almost as if speaking aloud would break the fragile courage she had gathered. The little boy in the corner table was watching her now. His fingers stopped tapping on the table, and his eyes widened in curiosity. There was a small hope in his expression, a silent question. Would she really play? That look, so innocent and trusting, strengthened her resolve. She had played for herself before, she had played for her family, but never for someone who might truly need it. Even for just a few moments, she inched closer to the piano and finally placed her hands on the keys. They felt cool, smooth, and alive under her touch. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Conversations faded into background noise in her mind. The clinking of glasses, the soft laughter, the polite chatter, all of it disappeared. There was only the piano, and there was only her. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment, unsure where to begin. She could hear the melody in her mind, a song she had played countless times in her small apartment, but now it had a weight she had never felt before. Every note would carry the story of years spent hiding, of dreams delayed, of passions suppressed. She closed her eyes for just a moment, letting her memory guide her fingers. Then she pressed the first key. A single note rang out, clear and pure. It was soft at first, almost tentative, but it was enough. Enough to break the silence in her own heart. She played the second note, then the third, and suddenly the music began to flow. It was as if the piano had been waiting for her all these years, as if it had been holding the perfect sound just for this moment. The room started to change. Conversations paused. Some guests looked around, surprised by the sound, unsure where it was coming from. The little boy in the corner smiled, leaning forward with his eyes wide. Even the adults began to notice, their attention shifting to the piano and the young waitress who sat at it. No one could believe what they were hearing. She didn't look at the guests. She didn't think about what they would say or how they might judge her. She only thought about the music, about the story she was telling through the keys. Every note carried her memories, her longing, her hope, and her fear. She felt a strange freedom, as if she had stepped into another world where nothing mattered except the song. The first few moments were shaky. Her fingers trembled slightly, and she hesitated between notes. But the more she played, the more the music seemed to guide her. It wasn't perfect, not in the sense of a trained concert pianist, but it was honest. It was real. And that honesty carried something powerful that no amount of polish or sophistication could ever match. A soft hush fell over the room. Guests leaned back in their chairs, turning to face the piano. The laughter had stopped. The wine glasses paused mid-air. Even the waiters seemed frozen, unsure of how to move without disturbing the spell that had taken over the room. Everyone was listening, completely captivated, and the young waitress felt a warmth spread through her chest. She realized that the music had a power far greater than she had imagined. The little boy in the corner clapped softly, but even his small applause seemed to echo with significance. She glanced at him for a fraction of a second and smiled. She knew that the music had reached him, that it had touched something inside him just as it had touched something inside her. That simple connection, unspoken but real, gave her courage to continue, to let the music grow and expand. With each passing moment, her confidence increased. She moved from soft, delicate notes to more complex passages, her fingers flying across the keys with a rhythm that felt both natural and alive. She could feel the story unfolding, not in words but in melodies that spoke directly to the heart. The guests began to lean forward, their faces showing a mixture of surprise and awe. They were witnessing something rare, something genuine, Something unexpected. The waitress closed her eyes completely now, losing herself in the music. She remembered all the times she had doubted herself, all the moments she had wished for recognition that never came. But none of that mattered now. There was only the piano, only the music, only the magic of the moment. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of being able to express herself fully. Finally, without restraint, a few of the guests whispered to each other, trying to identify who the pianist was. Some looked around, shocked, when they realized it was a waitress in the room, someone they had never noticed before. The contrast was astonishing, the elegance of the surroundings, the wealth and composure of the guests. And here was a young woman, in a simple uniform, playing with a skill and emotion that none of them had expected. The music reached its peak, the notes flowing seamlessly, rising and falling like waves. She felt the energy of the room respond to her playing. She felt the collective breath of the guests, the way their attention and emotion merged with her own. In that moment, she understood something she had never realized before. Music was more than sound. Music was connection. It was the bridge between hearts, the language that could speak louder than words. As the final notes approached, she slowed her playing, letting the melody fade gently, softly, as if tucking it away for the listeners to savor. The last note lingered in the air, a delicate echo that seemed to hold the entire room in a moment of suspended time. Silence followed, deep and profound. It was the kind of silence that comes when everyone is holding their breath, afraid to break the spell, afraid that if they move, the magic might disappear, and then, slowly, softly, the applause began. At first, a few hands clapped, hesitant and unsure, but soon the entire room joined in. The clapping grew louder, richer, more enthusiastic, until it filled the restaurant completely. The guests looked at her now with new eyes, some with admiration, some with disbelief, but all with respect. The young waitress sat at the piano, catching her breath, her hands still hovering over the keys, and she felt a joy she had not felt in years. The little boy clapped harder than anyone else, his smile wide and genuine. She reached out and gave him a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of the connection they had shared through the music. For a moment the room seemed united, not by wealth or status, but by the raw, undeniable power of talent and emotion. As she slowly rose from the piano, the guests continued to applaud, some standing now, some even whispering to each other about the unexpected performance. The young waitress realized that she had not only played a song, she had created a memory, a moment that would stay with the people in that room long after they left. She felt a strange mixture of relief, pride, and humility. She stepped back, her hands still trembling slightly, but her heart was light. She had taken the leap, faced her fear, and shared her gift. And in return, she had received something she hadn't expected: recognition, admiration, and most importantly, a renewed belief in herself. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen, not just as a waitress, but as a person with talent, courage, and heart. The music had done more than fill the room. It had transformed it. The wealthy guests, who had arrived expecting an ordinary evening, had been given something extraordinary. They had been reminded that brilliance often comes from the most unexpected places, and that true talent cannot be hidden forever. As the applause slowly died down, she returned to her duties, carrying trays and refilling glasses, but the atmosphere in the restaurant had changed. Conversations resumed, but they were different now, quieter, thoughtful, and more attentive. She could feel the lingering energy of the music, the way it had shifted something invisible but important in everyone present. And in her own heart, she knew that this night, this unexpected moment, was only the beginning. The music had ended, but the restaurant was not the same. A deep silence filled the room, heavier and more powerful than any sound. The guests who had been chatting, laughing, and checking their phones were now still, frozen in disbelief. Their eyes were wide, faces stunned, and hands lingering in midair. They had expected a polite evening, a soft background performance perhaps, but what they had just witnessed was something far beyond any expectation. The young waitress stepped back from the piano, her heart still pounding, her hands trembling slightly. She could hardly believe what she had just done. The notes she had played still echoed in her mind, and the connection she had felt with the music, the piano, and the audience seemed almost unreal. For a moment she wondered if she had imagined it. But the expressions on the guests' faces told her the truth. What had just happened was very real. The silence lasted for a heartbeat. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, the first clap came. A hand rose from one of the tables, soft and tentative, as if the person wasn't sure whether it was allowed. Then another clap joined it, followed by another. The applause grew steadily, filling the room, building in intensity until it became a wave of sound. People stood, some leaning forward, others on their feet entirely, and the young waitress felt her chest swell with a mixture of pride, relief, and amazement. It wasn't just applause. There were whispers, comments, and exclamations of surprise. "Did she just—" one guest murmured. "I can't believe it," said another. "She's incredible," someone whispered across the table. The room was buzzing with awe and admiration, and she realized that the music had not only touched hearts, it had changed perceptions. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer just a waitress serving food. She was a musician, a storyteller, and a presence that no one could ignore. The little boy in the corner was clapping harder than anyone else, his face glowing with excitement. He looked at her with a mix of wonder and joy, and she returned his gaze with a small, shy smile. That simple moment of connection gave her more satisfaction than any applause could. For a brief second, the rest of the world disappeared, and all that mattered was that she had reached someone's heart. Some of the wealthy guests were silent, still processing what had happened. They had been used to seeing talent in carefully controlled environments, polished performances, and rehearsed presentations. But this raw, honest, and unexpected performance was different. It reminded them that true skill and emotion could not be faked, could not be bought, and could not be contained within their expectations. It came from within, from courage, passion, and years of hidden effort. The staff, too, were watching in astonishment. Waiters paused mid-step, unsure whether to continue their duties, as if moving would somehow disturb the magic that had just unfolded. Even the chefs in the kitchen peeked through the open door, their expressions a mix of surprise and admiration. They had seen many performances, many events, but few moments carried the power of this one. It was as if the room had been transformed, filled with a sense of possibility and wonder that could not be ignored. The young waitress took a deep breath and allowed herself to relax slightly. Her hands still shook, and her legs felt a little weak, but she felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in years. The courage she had found, the risk she had taken, had created something extraordinary. She had given the audience a gift, but in return, she had received something far greater, a renewed sense of herself and her own potential. Some guests began to approach her cautiously, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and admiration. They asked her how long she had been playing, if she had received formal training, and where she had learned such talent. She answered quietly, almost shyly, explaining that she had been playing for most of her life, but circumstances had forced her to put it aside. Their faces softened, and she noticed a shift in their eyes. Respect, understanding, and awe had replaced the polite detachment they had carried at the beginning of the evening. The little boy's mother smiled and leaned forward, whispering something to him. He nodded eagerly and waved at the waitress. That small gesture, full of innocent gratitude, made her feel something profound. She realized that her music had reached across boundaries of age, status, and expectation. It had spoken to the human heart in a way that nothing else could. As the evening continued, the restaurant buzzed with a different kind of energy. Conversations resumed, but they were quieter, thoughtful, and tinged with a new awareness. Guests shared their impressions of the music, their surprise at its beauty, and their admiration for the young woman who had played it. They discussed how unusual it was, how rare, and how unexpectedly moving. Some admitted that they had never felt so genuinely touched by a performance in a place like this before. The young waitress moved carefully between tables, resuming her duties, but she was no longer invisible. People noticed her now, some with awe, some with curiosity, and some with genuine warmth. They smiled at her, asked questions, and complimented her not only on her service, but also on her talent. It was a new feeling, strange and wonderful, to be seen for more than just her job. Her thoughts drifted again to her past. She remembered all the years she had spent working, sacrificing her dreams for survival, hiding her talents to fit into a world that didn't always recognize them. And now, in a single moment, all of that had changed. She realized that courage, even small acts of it, could create opportunities that seemed impossible. She had taken a risk, stepped out of her comfort zone, and the world had responded in kind. The little boy came up to her during a brief pause, his eyes wide with excitement. "That was amazing," he said softly. "You made me feel happy." She knelt down slightly and smiled at him. "I'm glad," she whispered. "That was exactly what I hoped." In that simple exchange, she felt the power of her gift. Music was not just sound. It was connection, emotion, and shared experience. She had reached someone's heart, and that made everything she had endured worthwhile. Some of the older guests were talking quietly among themselves, clearly impressed. "I have never seen anything like this," one said. "And from a waitress." "Incredible." Another nodded, adding, "Talent doesn't care about position or wealth." "This is proof." The young waitress overheard a few of these comments, and a small smile formed on her lips. She had worked for recognition before, but this was different. This was genuine appreciation, heartfelt and unforced. The restaurant had become a place of quiet reflection. People lingered over their meals, spoke in softer tones, and seemed more attentive to each other. The music had changed the atmosphere, leaving a lingering sense of awe and possibility. It was as if, for a few hours, the room had been reminded of something important, that greatness often comes from unexpected places, and that true talent can shine regardless of circumstance. As the evening drew on, the applause and admiration continued to echo in her mind. She moved from table to table, refilling glasses and taking orders, but she felt different. She had crossed a threshold she had long feared, faced her insecurities, and discovered a strength she didn't know she still possessed. The piano had not just been an instrument, it had been a mirror, reflecting her courage and potential back at her. The guests who had witnessed her performance carried a sense of reverence with them. Even as they left the restaurant later, their conversations returned to the moment, to the music, and to the young woman who had surprised them all. It was a night they would remember, not because of the wealth or the luxury surrounding them, but because of the unexpected beauty and honesty they had experienced. Meanwhile, the young waitress returned to her station, taking a deep breath. She felt a sense of accomplishment and fulfillment that she had not experienced in years. She had given something meaningful to the world, and in return the world had recognized her. The fear and doubt that had plagued her earlier in the evening had been replaced with a quiet confidence, a belief that her talent, her courage, and her heart were enough. She looked at the piano one last time as the evening wound down. Its black surface gleamed under the lights, and she felt a strange sense of gratitude. It had waited for her, silently and patiently, until she was ready to step forward. And when she had, it had transformed not only the room, but also herself. The night would be remembered by everyone present. The wealthy guests would speak of it for years, telling their friends about the young waitress who had taken a chance and created a moment of genuine beauty. But for her, the night was something more personal. It was proof that courage, talent, and heart could overcome fear and circumstance. It was a reminder that she was capable of greatness, even when the world seemed indifferent. And as she finally finished her duties, stacking the last plates and wiping down the counters, she allowed herself to imagine what might come next. She had stepped into the light for the first time in years, and she knew that nothing would ever be quite the same. The music had opened a door, and she was ready to walk through it, one note at a time. The restaurant had quieted down, but the energy from the performance still lingered in the air. Guests who had been chatting softly were now speaking in hushed, excited tones, exchanging looks and words filled with admiration. The young waitress moved among them, carrying trays and refilling glasses, but everything felt different now. She was no longer invisible. Every glance, every compliment, Every whispered word reminded her that something extraordinary had happened tonight. Even after the applause had faded, the memory of the music stayed with everyone. Guests lingered at their tables longer than usual, not because of the food or wine, but because of the shared experience they had just witnessed. They had come expecting an ordinary evening, yet they had left touched, inspired, and reminded that life could surprise them in the most unexpected ways. The young waitress had changed the night, and in doing so, she had changed the people around her. She returned to her station, her hands no longer trembling, but her heart still racing with excitement and pride. The adrenaline of performing was slowly giving way to a quiet, satisfying joy. She reflected on everything that had brought her to this moment, the years of practice, the sacrifices, the doubts, the moments of longing when she had almost given up. Each experience, each challenge had shaped her into the person who could rise to this moment. And now she realized that all those years had led to something meaningful. The little boy in the corner came up to her again, tugging gently at her sleeve. "Thank you," he said softly, his eyes shining. "You made tonight so special." She knelt down to his level, smiling warmly. "I'm glad," she whispered. "That's exactly what I hoped for." The simple sincerity of his words touched her deeply. It reminded her why she had loved music in the first place, not for applause or recognition, but for its ability to reach people's hearts and make them feel something real. Guests continued to approach her, expressing their amazement and curiosity. They asked how long she had been playing, where she had learned, and if she had considered performing professionally. She answered with humility, explaining that life had not always allowed her to pursue her dreams fully, but that she had never stopped loving music. Their reactions were genuine and warm, and she could see that they respected not only her talent but also the courage it had taken to share it in such an unexpected way. Her mind wandered to the years she had spent working quietly, blending into the background, hiding her talents, and feeling that the world might never recognize them. Tonight, everything had shifted. She realized that courage and authenticity had the power to transform not only her life, but the lives of those around her. One small act, one decision to follow her heart, had created a ripple that reached far beyond what she could see. The music had done more than entertain, it had connected people. She noticed couples leaning toward each other, speaking in softer, more thoughtful tones. Friends who had been distracted by their phones were now fully engaged, discussing the performance and the emotions it had stirred. The wealthy guests, accustomed to luxury and status, were reminded that true value and impact were not measured in money, but in talent, passion, and honesty. Even the staff seemed affected. Waiters and kitchen staff who had been observers now spoke quietly about the performance, sharing their admiration and wonder. They had seen many events, many performers, but this had been different. This had been real, raw, and unforgettable. The young waitress realized that her courage had not only earned her respect from the guests, but had also inspired those around her, reminding everyone that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they dared to try. She returned to the piano briefly, running her fingers lightly over the keys. They were warm from the music, resonating with the energy of the evening. For a moment she imagined the future playing for more people, sharing her talent and never again hiding the gift that had defined her since childhood. The thought filled her with hope and determination. Tonight had been a beginning, a turning point, and she felt ready to embrace whatever came next. The little boy waved goodbye, and she waved back, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. It was moments like these, small and sincere, that made everything worth it. Music had given her a voice, and through that voice she had created joy, wonder, and connection. She realized that the true reward was not recognition or fame, but the ability to touch lives, even in ways that seemed fleeting but mattered deeply. As the evening drew to a close, the restaurant staff began tidying up, and the guests started to leave. Many lingered a little longer, hoping for one more glance at the young woman who had transformed their evening. Some spoke quietly about inviting her to play again, while others simply wanted to express their admiration before departing. She accepted their words with humility, grateful for the recognition but more aware than ever of the deeper impact she had made. Walking among the tables, She reflected on the lessons of the night. Courage was not the absence of fear, it was the decision to act despite fear. Talent was not measured by training or opportunity, it was shown through authenticity and heart. And sometimes the smallest act of bravery could create a memory that would last far longer than anyone expected. She had been invisible, overlooked, and underestimated. Yet tonight she had reminded everyone, including herself, of the power she carried within. Her thoughts drifted to her own life beyond the restaurant, the quiet mornings, the long hours of work, the dreams she had tucked away. Tonight had changed something fundamental. She realized that her passion and dedication could no longer be hidden. She had been reminded that life offered moments of opportunity, and it was up to her to take them. The music had shown her that even small, ordinary people could make extraordinary impact when they followed their hearts. The piano remained in the corner, silent now but still resonant with the echoes of the evening. She ran her fingers over the keys once more, feeling the warmth and energy linger. It had been a witness to her courage, her talent, and her heart. It had helped her transform a simple night into something unforgettable, not just for the guests, but for herself. The wealthy patrons left the restaurant in thoughtful silence, carrying the memory of the music with them. Their evening, which had begun like so many others, had become something exceptional. They had witnessed not just talent, but resilience, courage, and authenticity. They had been reminded that greatness can come from the most unexpected places, and that true worth is not measured by wealth, position, or appearance, but by the depth of one's heart and the sincerity of one's actions. As the last guests departed, the young waitress stood alone for a moment, taking it all in. The room was quiet, polished, and elegant, yet it felt warmer, more human. She had left her mark not through her uniform, her service, or even her presence, but through her courage and music. She realized that this night would remain with her forever, a moment when she had dared to step forward and, in doing so, had transformed her own life and the lives of those around her. The piano seemed to glow softly under the lights, as if acknowledging her journey. She placed her hands lightly on the keys one last time, feeling a sense of gratitude and promise. The music had given her more than an opportunity. It had given her a reminder of who she was, who she could be, and the power of following her heart. In the quiet of the empty restaurant, she allowed herself a smile. Fear had been replaced by confidence. Doubt had been replaced by hope. And invisibility had been replaced by recognition, respect, and the realization that her voice, her talent, her courage could change the world even in small, meaningful ways. The night had begun as any other, filled with elegance, wealth, and routine. But it had ended differently. It had ended with music that touched hearts, courage that inspired admiration, and a young waitress who had discovered the power of her own voice. She had reminded everyone present that moments of true beauty and greatness often come when least expected, from people who are willing to take a chance and step into the light. And as she finally stepped out of the restaurant, into the cool night air, she felt a sense of possibility she had never known. The world outside was vast, full of unknown paths and opportunities, but she felt ready. Tonight had shown her that she could face fear, embrace her talent, and leave a lasting impact. She walked forward with a quiet determination, knowing that this was only the beginning of a journey that would carry her far beyond the walls of the restaurant and the keys of the piano. She had discovered that one night, one performance, one decision to follow her heart, could change everything. And as the stars twinkled above, she realized that life had endless possibilities, waiting for those brave enough to take the first step. The piano, the music, and the courage she had found would remain with her forever, guiding her toward the next chapter, the next song, and the next moment when she could continue to inspire, connect, and touch hearts in ways words alone could never achieve.